Welcome to the Horse Girl Gazetteer. Join Georgia and Kate as we dive into this week's conversation. From health and fitness to communication and understanding, we are determined to develop our maps and help you to develop yours. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
How are you?
Great.
That's good. Hi, Dash.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is Dash. He is our wonderful farrier at Hideaway. We were just chatting, and we're going to chat more.
Well, I think to start out, it would be great to kind of introduce you to our listeners by maybe telling them kind of the timeline of your experience, how you came to your work as a farrier, and what different areas of study you've been a part of or different experiences that you've had that have kind of shaped your understanding of hoof care and how that fits into the bigger picture of horsemanship for your clients.
Okay, yeah, totally. My senior year in high school, I started taking riding lessons and I really enjoyed it and wanted to continue it. But then I went off to college and originally I went to get a 4-year degree to go into the Peace Corps because since I was really young, that's all I wanted to do. And so I found a school that was small and had a sustainable agriculture program. And so I'm like, okay, cool, I can do that. And as I was pulling into the college with my sister, she was reading that they have a draft animal systems minor. I laughed. I'm like, who actually gets a minor in draft animal management? Well, I turned that into my major because I got down on the farm and started working the draft horses just on long lines, and I fell in love with them. I spent the 4 years logging and doing field work with horses and oxen, which the interesting thing is that working the oxen made me a better horseman because horses, we always have some point of contact when we're working them. Oxen, it's all energy. And so that really helped me focus my energy, which is really cool. And so if you ever get a chance to drive oxen, it'll make you a better horseman.
Cool.
Horse person. And then part of that program was introductory to farrier science. So you know how to talk to your farrier when they come. And I've never been studious. I've never really done all my homework ever, except for that class. I did every single drop of information I could. I just fell in love with it. And my teacher had kept 20 horses on his books so the students could learn how to trim horses around Craftsbury Common, Vermont. And while that class wasn't running, he still had to keep up with them. And so I kept up with him and we went around and trimmed those horses. And some of them I would go up to and he's like, keep your teeth in your head. And because they were kickers. And so I never got kicked in the face. But one day when I was clearing a path for when we were going to work the horses there the next day when I was a TA, I knocked both teeth out of my head with my axe.
Oh no.
Which I walked into class that night and I said, you know how you're always telling me to keep my teeth in my head? And I smiled and he lost it. But back to the point so I trimmed horses with him for 3 years. We had a forage on the campus and I was in there most nights during college, belting out Frozen. I didn't realize it wasn't as soundproof as I thought it was, but it's good pastime while you're trying to forage and waiting for the metal to heat up. And that led me to my senior year in college where I had to do an internship. And so I chose a draft-powered farm out in Michigan with Tillers International. That's a really cool organization. The first thing I did when I got to the farm was pick up the horses' feet, all 4 horses. Each one threw me into a wall. And I got back up, got back under, and spent the rest of the summer teaching them to stand properly. And by the end of the summer, each could hold a foot up for a minute.
Wow.
But that kind of drove it home for me that that's what I wanted to do. I liked haying, I liked doing field work, but my passion was horses' feet and getting them to move properly. The phrase that my teacher kept going over whenever we had the farrier science class was you need 2 things to be a farrier: a strong back and a weak mind, because you keep going back to it. And I got that. I can do that. That led me to researching farrier schools And I chose to go to Cornell's farrier school, which is the oldest continuous running farrier school in the country. And so I got to see really cool cases because of the Cornell's vet school.
Yeah.
I got to go into surgery my third day at the school to help put on a pair of glue-ons on a filly that was getting her check ligament cut because she had a club foot and she was worth $500,000. And so she needed to be fixed right away. And so I think she was about 3 weeks old.
Wow.
And as far as I kept up with her, she has had a pretty good career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thought I had something lined up to work with a farrier in Maine who then ended up retiring. And I went out on my own working with another farrier, Troy Pride, for probably 2 years while building up my business. And I got handed a few horses at Hideaway, and that's how I ended up here at Hideaway.
I think that we were one of the first farms that you came to
I think
when
so,
you
yeah.
were interning at the very beginning.
Yeah, with Anne.
Yes.
And
Yep.
that went okay. I think it was Brennan that decided to go for a run.
I think it was Xander.
Oh, it might have been Xander.
Yeah,
I think Xander.
Xander made a run for it somewhere in the process.
Yep, he did.
Xander's has been 22 for the past 8 or so years. So
Looks really good for a 22-year-old.
he does. He's still a bit spunky.
You talked about how farriery is like where you have been the most interested in doing learning and like digging into it and all of that fun stuff. Where do you find there are like misconceptions with what you have learned versus what people kind of assume about either hoof care in general or hoof health itself?
So when I first started, when I was just trimming, I was on the boat that horses didn't need shoes ever. I thought all horses could be barefoot trimmed, and people just put shoes on for whatever reason. Like I didn't have anything, and that's what I firmly believed until I got to farrier school and started seeing what horses were coming in with. And so that led me to understanding that shoes have a place, and some horses it's a requirement. But there are quite a few clients that want to go the quote unquote natural way for their horse. So instead of putting shoes on, it's just a trim to fix it. But I have to go over with them that like trimming it is not necessarily going to fix everything. And if it can be fixed with trimming, it'll take a lot longer to get them back in a comfortable, sound scenario. And therefore, these clients that want to do these natural ways on these horses won't be able to ride their horse. Their horse will be uncomfortable until we get the hoof back to where it belongs, which can be sometimes a difficult conversation with people that are very focused on the natural way from what they've read on the internet, that this is the best way. Horses out in the wild are all barefoot and they do just fine. And I have to go back into history and the facts about horses. Wild horses walk almost 20 miles a day. They are in drier climates sometimes, and the ones that don't have good hoofs don't make it. And so that's why all the wild horses look great.
Yeah.
The horses that we have and love are in smaller paddocks. They do not walk 20 miles a day. And so their feet will not act the same way. And having people understand that is very important.
I think that's really an interesting thing to think about because there are trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have horses that we have these conversations about here, where like the preference would be to have as many horses barefoot as possible. I mean, it's more cost effective for one thing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's certainly part of the hoof function is movement of the soft tissues, which is restricted by a steel shoe. And I mean, is that something that you would agree is a part of the?
Yes. So a steel shoe or aluminum shoe, they are more restrictive, but you can also, if you were to take a slow motion video, because we typically nail the first 3 holes
Mhm.
in the front of the foot, if you take a slow motion video of the back of the foot, those heels are still opening up
Mhm.
and there's still flexion out and in versus up and down, what a barefoot horse would have. And for the most part, horses are okay with that. It allows me to adjust the breakover back
Yeah.
and put it somewhere. If I were to put the point of breakover on a barefoot horse, they would be lame.
Yeah.
But by changing the mechanics in that foot, I'm cutting down the amount of time it's going to take to get that foot in a better, healthier scenario sooner than I could being barefoot. By putting these shoes on these horses with the wedges, with all this stuff, and people do come to me because on the internet you hear that wedges crush heels.
Right.
All wedges crush heels. And the up to, let's say, about 15 years ago, they did, because about 15-ish years ago, wedges became a lot more popular to get the hoof pastern axis back in line.
Mhm.
And because of that, and when everything's in line, horses are more comfortable and they'll move out. But they, over the last 15-ish years, they've discovered that you need the frog sport. You need to be able to use the rest of the foot, because without using the rest of the foot, you can crush heels, especially on thoroughbreds that have splayed out feet and are made to run fast, but not made to have good feet.
Maybe it would be helpful to, just for the sake of this conversation,
Mhm.
when you're looking at a foot, what are your primary goals? Because you've mentioned kind of bony alignment
Mhm.
being one goal, and then the function of the hoof is another goal. Can you speak more to those or add to that list of things that you're looking at when you're deciding how to trim
Yeah.
or shoe a horse?
So typically, when a farrier is getting ready to do a horse, it's not there. We're not starting to look at it when it's in front of us. We're listening for it when it walks down the hallway. We're listening for lost shoes, or we're listening for the hoof. We want a good solid boom versus boom bong, which is just like this. Them, if it's like the second one, I realize no one can see me, but you can hear when a horse is landing, hitting one side harder and slamming down the opposite side. And that tells you that there's imbalance in the hoof. And as they're walking up to you, I'm watching each foot and looking for a good heel to toe landing. Then once they're head in front of me, I like looking ahead of them, like facing them, to make sure coronary bands are level.
Mhm.
Because if one side is higher than the other, that tells you that the hoof is uneven on the bottom.
Yep.
Or if there's any jamming, so if it looks like there's like a little hill in the coronary band,
Yep.
that means that spot was left high
Mhm.
for either one time or multiple times, and that's causing jamming within the coronary band. And then when I look from the side, I want to go from the fetlock and draw an invisible line down straight through the coffin bone.
Mhm.
And I want that to be as straight as possible, because that means that there is no excess pressure on the navicular area, the bursa of the bone. And I also don't want it to be broken forward, because that's putting a lot of tension on the extensor tendon and extensor process. And so that's why we want that as lined up as possible. And then I look for any dishing, flaring within the foot, because that's indicative of an uneven trim. And the balance of a foot is not the same for every horse, because not every horse has a straight leg.
Yep.
So I'm also looking up the leg at the fetlock, at the knee. Are they angling in or toeing out? And so looking at all of that influences how I'm going to trim. And then if we're adding shoes, that influences how I'm going to shoe that horse for their peak performance, or what I view as what their foot should look like.
Mhm.
And that is really what we are looking for. Is, as a farrier, you need to be able to see what's underneath that flare, see what underneath that angle deformity. And so that's a lot of stuff we're looking for. And as horse owners, I think it's important, if you're looking at a new horse, take a minute and step back and look at all those things, because if that knee is not right or that fetlock's not right, a lot of people buy horses and expect farriers to be able to fix it or change it and make that horse comfortable. And there are a lot of times that I can make it comfortable for now, but we are looking at 5 years, 10 years, because that knee, he's over at the knee or he is rotated at the fetlock. We're looking at issues down the road. And so I think it's very important for new horse owners, if you are not knowledgeable about this, have a farrier, have a vet, have a friend that is knowledgeable to come and look at horses, because a lot of people buy horses and like, oh, we're gonna fix it the natural way. And I have a horse right now that's what they wanted to do. She's in 4 shoes, full pads, and we are moving towards putting a shoe called a full rocker on the back. But she just had no one that knew to look for those things. And so she has her horse, and now this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you're talking about looking up the leg, because clearly the way that the horse is trimmed and the shape of the hoof and the work that you do influences how the horse moves. But I think also, kind of from what you're saying, the way the horse moves also influences the shape of the hoof.
Exactly.
And the way that the hoof grows out. So that's kind of an endless cycle.
Yeah.
I think ends up being really important to be able to be collaborative between the training and the riding and the hoof care, because they both influence each other so strongly. And the work that you're doing has to be supported by correct, balanced training and riding, and a system of developing the horse that makes them stronger and more even and more balanced. And likewise, good training can really only be supported by farrier work that is helping the horse be more even, more balanced, straighter, etc. And I think it's especially interesting to think about that as a forward moving progress, which is why I appreciate you so much as a farrier, is that I know that you are thinking about not just the hoof that you're looking at today, but like the process of that hoof changing over time, and that the way that you trim and shoe the horses is not exactly the same every cycle, because the horses have developed in their work or in the shoeing, or their nutrition has changed. So it's a very dynamic process through time, which I think is also an interesting way to think about, kind of going back to the debate about barefoot versus shoed, and like, when is it time to put shoes on, or when is it appropriate to keep them barefoot, is thinking about the shoeing as a tool in that process that has to be considered relative to the work that the horse is going to be doing.
For most of my horses, my goal is to get them back to the absolute basics of as basic as I can with that horse. So there are some horses that when my clients get them or they're new to me, I say we're shoeing them for now, because I try to be as clear as I can with clients. This is my goal, is X, Y, and Z. I need this toe to come, this whole foot to come back. And in order to get this foot to come back and be under the horse, I have to bring the heels back and the toe back. But by bringing the heels back, that inherently will lower the entire structure, possibly causing a slightly negative angle within the hoof pattern axis. And so we're going to wedge it for now.
Yeah.
And it'll take 9 months to a year to grow a new foot.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to reevaluate and check it every time I come back. Are we still good with this wedge? Do we need to lower the wedge? Because if you watch the hoof and watch the way they stand, watch the way they move, it'll tell you that you're ready to lessen the wedge. Because when they're ready for a lesser wedge, you'll start seeing some ripples in the heels, because they have grown enough foot that they don't need as much of a wedge. And so I normally I try to go down by a degree. So if they're in a 3, go to 2 with a frog support, and then we go down to a 1, and then a flat pad with our frog support. And for them, depending on the horse, because every horse is different, I liking them just to a shoe, back to a normal shoe, easy. 1, I know that I did my job right, and they are comfortable. They have a good foot. That also personally, it makes that job faster. I don't have to worry about cutting pads and doing everything else. I can just go put the shoe on, shape it, and that horse moves off nicely.
I think that's very cool. And I think that when people are having these conversations, ideally they're in the conversation with their trainer, with their farrier, thinking about realistic expectations about I think soundness is not an absolute term. So it's like the soundness for your intended purpose. And so then you can be making those decisions about how you're going to be doing farrier work, the speed at which you're expecting progress to be made. As you're saying, it's going to be a lot faster if you put a shoe on the horse. If you're willing to let the horse sit in the field for 9 to 12 months, then you have it's a little bit of a different conversation than I want to show the horse next week and have them sound enough, or I want to be jumping this horse next week. That's a different conversation.
It is a completely different conversation. And I enjoy the conversations that we have and Savannah and I have about the posture, about I've learned so much about lateral movement and getting them stronger for the job, because for a long time it was just, I was like, what can I fix about this hoof to make them better? And I just kept looking down instead of looking at the animal that the feet are attached to.
Right.
I've really gotten into asking what kind of work they're in.
Yeah.
What are you asking of this horse? What kind of job are they in? And that will influence it. And I like working with trainers. I ask them, can you do more lateral work? Can you do more cavalettes? Can you do X, Y, and Z for this horse? And that will help me.
Very cool. This is why it's all so interesting and exciting. It's just like an endless loop of knowledge, which is so cool. And something I think that's important to remember, I'm fortunate to have many horses that I am working with, so I can see the progress happening in many different horses in many different ways. And I realize that that's a little bit of a luxury. And if you have just one horse and that's your one horse that you would really love to go to horse shows with, or you have some goal with, the progress can feel so, so, so slow.
Yeah.
Let's highlight again, 9 months to a year to grow a foot.
Yes.
And that's what they're standing on. And that is going to be influenced by the quality of the training, but the quality of the training is going to be influenced by the quality of the foot that they're standing on. So, none of these things are a fix it, move on to the next thing. I think this conversation is such a wonderful example of the reality that progress and learning happen in a kind of a spiral upwards, where you keep coming back to the same things at the next level and then the next level and the next level as you make progress, which I think can be helpful to feel like, oh, we're worrying about the feet again. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean you've gone backwards.
No.
It just means it's the next step with the horse's feet. And that's eternal, right? With horses, we never just end up well, we're done now. I've done it all.
Yeah.
It's over. Thank goodness, because, that's what makes it fun and interesting.
That'd be boring.
It would be.
Yeah. And where do you think in the spiral of learning and going with horses, nutrition comes into it?
Oh my gosh, it's a whole nother domain. I think we've made some pretty big shifts in the nutrition of our horses. We made a push to eliminate processed sugars and have I think we're on a grain free at this point. And that's everything from our minis to our Clydesdales to our thoroughbreds. Yeah. And they all are good weight. They're all shinier than they've ever been. And I think we're 3 months in now, roughly. And we can start to see the difference in the hoof quality in some of them. Yeah. Which is fascinating.
Yeah. And with the length of time it takes, I would be very interested to see what it looks like in 9 months. Yeah. Because we're looking at the coronary band and watching that foot come down. Yes. And that I'm just fascinated to see what happens.
Yeah. 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 And we're doing a little bit of an experiment here with the nutrition. But there's a fair amount of chatter and research around, soy and processed sugars that are not great things. So hopefully it's a positive direction.
I guess this is kind of a question for both of you, but mostly for Dash, because thinking specifically about feet, if we're talking about the spiral of learning and all of that fun stuff, obviously I think a lot of people see stuff online and like on Facebook or on TikTok or whatever and are like, oh, well, that's a newfangled thing. But I don't know if a lot of people know where they can actually look for like reputable information. So like what would you recommend to a horse owner who wants to become more knowledgeable and be able to have like a real conversation with their farrier as resources?
I think my favorite book for clients is the Essential Hoof book. It's big, it's white, it's good, like coffee table topper, but it explains what a flare is, where it comes from, why they occur. It explains a lot of the confirmation and a lot of the stuff we study, but in actual basic terms that everyday people will understand versus talking about the chondrocollateral ligament of the navicular bone. And if instead of saying that, there's a little ligament attached to the navicular bone, and like it's not so complicated. So that's one of my favorite ones to suggest to people. Having a open conversation with your farrier, because I do have people that they like, oh, I saw this shoe on Instagram, or I saw this type of trimming, I saw this, and having the ability to walk up to your farrier and ask those questions, like, hey, I saw this, and I think it's cool. Can we try it? But coming to that conversation and understanding, willing to have the conversation with your farrier versus trying to just tell them to do X, Y, and Z. For me and most farriers I know, we're always down to have that conversation. And if I don't know anything about it, I will go research it and I'll come back and we'll have the conversation. And I'll be like, I don't think that's right for your horse. It's a cool idea, but it's just not the right thing. Or let's give it a try, as long as it's not a detrimental thing that could damage the horse in the long run.
Yeah.
But being willing to have that conversation and being willing to hear the word no is very important.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot out there and I'm always learning. I'm always finding new stuff. And I also find things on Instagram like, oh, that's really cool. I want to try that. But then I also have to start looking it up, and I have a stupid amount of books on farrier. And so that's where I go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because there is so much content and so much easily accessible content and so many strong opinions.
Yes.
Savannah's the other trainer here.
Yes.
We've mentioned Savannah before. She's the other trainer, and her specialty is around posture and particularly starting on the ground.
Yep.
And particularly the connection between nutrition, diet, hoof health, and posture. And she has a strong bias towards barefoot.
She does, yes.
And preserving the soft tissue function of the hoof.
Yes. She's done a lot of research, and it's a very good research. And she approached me with a new type of product that it will adhere to the sole, but still is flexible.
Yeah.
But the horses that she has and been working with have thinner soles, and so they are not fully comfortable being barefoot.
Yeah.
And so she came to me with that new product and said, this is what I want to try. And I did some research and it seems viable. And so with that, because we've had that really open conversation, and she's really explained her point of view of keeping them barefoot for the reasons of allowing the soft tissue movement.
Yeah.
And I'm very willing to try that because, one, I don't think it's going to be a detriment to the horse.
Yeah.
And if it works, I will most definitely employ it on other horses that have thinner soles. And sometimes money is an issue, and so we can't do shoes.
Yeah.
But the horses need something. And so I'm always open to that, to something new and trying it. So we are going to try it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, Savannah and I will have that conversation and try the next thing. Yeah.
And Savannah in her work is not riding either of her horses.
No.
Currently. And she is in that conversation. Her assumption is that the level of work that she asks of her horses is completely dependent on their comfort and soundness through the other management, as far as using diet and nutrition and posture work, body work, fitness work to improve the hoof quality
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to putting a shoe on
Yeah.
unless it's absolutely needed.
Yep. I think it, like, for her, not riding them is okay with her. But for a lot of people, horses are not just their companions. They have a job, whether that's eventing, jumping, any sort of thing. So
Right.
those horses, because they aren't able to have the time off that her horses are,
Right.
shoes.
Right. If Savannah wanted to be jumping sooner,
Yes.
then her horses would not be able to do so without shoes on.
No, and that's correct.
And the timeline of getting to the point where they could be sound for jumping, sound for
Mm-hmm.
riding, whatever, is longer
Yes.
because of that choice. But that is, you know, as a horse owner, as a trainer, that's kind of where she gets to make a decision, where
Yep.
any horse owner gets to kind of weigh the pros and cons
Mhm.
of the different interventions, which is a fun and interesting conversation to have
Yeah.
when
it is.
approached in that way of like, okay, we have all these options and we can make some choices
Mhm.
for the horse for their best interest.
I'm interested to know if you've had any particular horses that stand out to you as like major learning points in your like farrier career, or any, like, you don't have to talk about like name names or anything like that, but just like cases that you found particularly interesting or educational.
Yeah. So I have one horse that it was earlier in my career when I didn't know as much as I know now, and I went, nailed a flat shoe on, and it looked funny, and when I picked it up, I was able to grab the toe of the shoe after being nailed and finished up, and I just pulled the shoe off, nails and everything, and the foot just fell apart. And in that case, I had to call my mentor, Troy Pride, in and asked him, I need help with this because I think they need glue-ons. I had never done glue-ons before. And so working with him, I learned so much about the function of the hoof and the fact that what we can do with shoes is take the mechanics that that horse needed, put them in the shoe, and build their hoof up with glue. And so we took that horse that wasn't a flat shoe and put it into 7 degrees of wedge with about an inch of breakover, bringing it back from the toe and removing a significant amount of hoof wall. And this horse, because of how severe it was, took about 2 years, and now is competing at a higher level and in a flat shoe because my client was willing to stay the course. And over the 2 years, this horse grew a foot in the right direction as long as we keep this horse on a good schedule and the toe backed up. This horse is completely fine being in a flat shoe. And the only reason he really needs shoes is because of the kind of competition he's in. If he was just a basic trail horse, I think he could be barefoot and I don't think he would care. But that I learned a lot because I didn't fully understand what the difference between lowering heels and backing them up was. And so that was a really big learning experience that I had with that horse. And I'm still learning. I'm currently working on a horse that foundered, and up until about 5 months ago, she was going fine. And then all of a sudden something changed, whether it was nutrition, whether it was something else in her life. And her foot has started to deteriorate. She's also 34, and so she's an old lady, but she still drags her owner out to the pasture every day. And so that horse, I also have a farrier come and work with me on that horse. And it's so interesting how with this horse, I can manipulate where the weight is on her foot, taking it off her toe, loading her frog, or loading her heels, adjusting the breakover in very unique ways, and how that affects her entire leg essentially. Because there was a point where I'm like, we're gonna get this toe way back, and she started knuckling over at the knee because she couldn't lock her knee anymore, and so that meant like that breakover was way too far back, and so kind of feathering it forward and messing with that is a very big learning experience. And just one more. I have a horse up in Augusta that I came in and thought, oh, I've brought the toe back and done all this stuff on hundreds of horses at this point. And so when I did that, I was looking at the feet. And that horse gave me a very eye-opening experience that I need to look up, because what I didn't notice is that horse is over at the knee. And so with that toe being that far back, that horse wasn't able to lock its knee. And so that horse, even though the toe looks longer and I would love to get it shorter, if we were to do that, she can't lock her knee anymore because of that confirmation above. And so after her, I really learned to look up and look at the horse versus I'm just looking at the feet, get the shoes on and go. That was a big reminder that I'm not shoeing a foot, I'm shoeing a horse.
Yeah.
Which is a very important distinction.
Yeah.
Because anyone can shoe a foot. Anyone can nail a shoe on. But taking time to look at the horse and watching it move, watching it walk up to you and hearing it walk away from you is crucial to really improving that horse versus nailing a shoe on and making some money.
And important for owners to remember that it's more than just the feet.
Yes.
And that your responsibility is the foot piece.
Yes.
In concert with the rest of it, but the owner also has the responsibility of the rest of the maintenance.
Yes.
The rest of the horse, and pulling in other professionals as necessary to address the biomechanics, the joint care, the vet, the dentist. I think there's some interesting relationships between teeth problems and foot problems.
Yeah.
That are really interesting. That's like a whole nother,
that's
a whole nother
thing.
podcast.
I work with a vet that a horse was moving in an odd way. And I asked him how he fixed it, because they were talking to the farrier, talking to the other vets. And he did a chiro adjustment on his tongue. He grabbed his tongue and pulled it, which popped something in his neck. And all of a sudden that horse was moving straighter and even more even.
It's wild.
It is insane.
Yeah. I think I have a lot of interest in fascia as a body system because it connects all of the things from the ligaments to the stuff kind of containing the muscles, the stuff containing your organs.
Mm-hmm.
Your fascia connects everything in kind of this net.
Yeah.
And as far as rider biomechanics, very relevant, very interesting. But also in terms of the biomechanics of how the horse operates as well. Super interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Way more to learn about that.
Yeah.
I think that's everything that we had in mind to talk about. So thank you again for having a conversation with us and bearing with us through some of this chaos.
Thank you for having me. I was happy to do it.
And yeah, talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week at the Horse Girl Gazetteer. You can find us online at Horse Girl Gazetteer on Facebook or Instagram, and you can listen wherever you find your podcasts. You can also email us questions or comments at horsegirlgazetteer@gmail.com. Georgia can be found at Equine Virtual Assistant on Instagram and Facebook, and Kate can be found at Hideaway Acres on Facebook and Hideaway Acres Horse Farm on Instagram. If you found yourself enjoying our content, please leave a review to help others find their way to us. We appreciate any and all support. Talk to you later.